Right, welcome to this course. This is Combustion MEL 812 and this is our first lecture. This is 8th January 2015. Now, there is only a brief course introduction that I have given here. So, first introduce the course, then chemical thermodynamics and chemical kinetics is the next topic. So, first a general introduction to combustion, then chemical thermodynamics and chemical kinetics, then conservation equations for multi-component systems. Then there are actually two kinds of combustion, broadly speaking. One is premixed flames, then the other is non-premixed flames. So, we will look at these. Then different types of premixed combustion. There are essentially two broad categories of premixed combustion. One is deflagration, the other is detonation. So, we will discuss some aspects of deflagration, actually a lot about deflagration, maybe not so much about detonation. Then there will be some lectures on non-premixed combustion. Non-premixed combustion is also known as diffusion flame combustion. And we will discuss also liquid fuel burning, which is characterized by droplet burning, and also burning of solids and some practical aspects of combustion. Now, there is no specific textbook which is recommended for this course, but I have given you a list of textbooks which are useful. So, one book which we will use for most part of the course is An Introduction to Combustion by Stephen Turns. I have also listed some journals here: Combustion and Flame, Combustion Science and Technology, and a few other journals like that. Now, the point is that you will not be referring to them every day, but if we give you a project or some term paper to work on, then you will have to look up some papers from these journals. And there is also a marks distribution given here. You can see that for yourself. Now, when it comes to combustion, we are all familiar with the word combustion. We all know what combustion means. So, you can say that combustion means burning. So, there is fuel, there is oxidizer, some burning will take place. So, that is what we call combustion. And I think you by now, since you already have an undergraduate degree, you already know that combustion is extremely important in mechanical engineering, because there are lots of combustion devices in which combustion is used. Now, we will use the first lecture to actually figure out what is combustion and what is the important applications of combustion. So, we know loosely what is combustion. We know that fuel has to burn with oxidizer, but combustion also has a definition. It is actually a very rapid oxidation process in which a lot of heat is quickly released. So, it is a rapid oxidation process, and it is usually also accompanied by light. In some cases there may not be that much light coming out from the combustion process, but usually also accompanied by light emission. So, it is a rapid oxidation process. Now, when we talk of combustion, we often also think about flames. So, the next question is, I defined combustion. So, the next question can be, what is a flame? So, flame is essentially a reaction zone. This is a zone at which reaction takes place. If we think about one flame that we are kind of familiar with, then we can think of a Bunsen burner flame. So, in chemistry lab, for example, you have seen a Bunsen burner flame. So, let me draw a sketch of the kind of arrangement that you have in a Bunsen burner situation. So, this is a tube which is connected, let us say, to an LPG cylinder in the lab. We are talking about, let us say, a chemistry lab or even our thermal science lab here. So, you have LPG flowing through this tube and coming to the base of the burner, and then you have this tube which you can see, and at the bottom of the tube there is also a ring with a hole on it. And you may have seen this, but if you take this apart, you will know that if you just disassemble this burner, then you will also know that this tube also has a hole, ring has a hole, and if the hole on the ring and the hole on the base of the tube, if these two match, then there is an opening. If they do not match, then there is no opening. Okay. So, there is a hole at the bottom of the tube, there is a hole on the ring, you can turn the ring. If the holes match, then there is an opening. If the holes do not match at all, then there is no opening. If they match partially, then there is partial opening. Now what does that do? It actually lets in air through this hole. This burner lets in air through the hole. So in this tube you get this fuel which is already coming from here. So you get fuel plus air because it has drawn in air through this hole. So you got this fuel plus air coming out from this tube, and then you get a flame looking like this. Actually it has also an outer glow like this. So you are all familiar with this situation. So again, loosely speaking, you would call this a flame. I am sure if you would call this a flame. And you may have also noticed that this kind of looks conical. Okay. Now what is a flame then? Flame is that physical space, usually thin, where you have this fuel air mixture coming and reacting. So this is flame is a zone where the reaction is actually most vigorous. So that is what is happening in the flame. So if you have LPG going to the flame along with air, then that LPG will burn. There is a combustion reaction taking place primarily in the flame zone, even though some reactions will take place little before this, some reactions will take place little after this also. But this is the most vigorous reaction zone, which is called a flame. So in the flame zone you have fuel and oxidizer reacting with one another, giving you carbon dioxide, maybe carbon monoxide, water vapor, and these combustion products. So the flame is transforming fuel and air to combustion products. Okay. Now we have spoken about combustion, we have just now spoken about flame, but we will also have to keep in mind that combustion of course mostly takes place in the flame mode, but there can be a non-flame mode of combustion also. So there is a non-flame mode of combustion also, we will come to that a little bit later. But broadly this is what we understand, that we have fuel and air, there is chemical reaction taking place. So there is a transformation taking place that gives you combustion products, and that also gives you a lot of heat very quickly released, and usually this is also accompanied by light. Okay. So how are we actually utilizing combustion? Why is combustion so important? Combustion is important because of the fact, primarily because of the fact that we need energy. Human civilization needs energy, and the energy is locked up as chemical energy in fuel. So if you can burn the fuel, then the energy gets released. And there are very major applications of combustion. We can think of, let us say, about 4 different areas. One is power production. So power generation is through combustion in many cases. For example, you can burn coal, you can burn natural gas, you can burn liquid fuel like crude oil. For power production you can also burn, let us say, petrol, diesel in engines, these are liquid fuels. So power production along with transportation. So power production can be for generation of electricity in thermal power plants, but power production can also be in engines. For example, in internal combustion engines, in aircraft engines, in stationary gas turbines, you can have this combustion to essentially produce power for electricity generation, or maybe producing power so that you can drive your vehicles. So to provide motive power. And it is very easy for you to appreciate how important that is. Alright, so combustion is not the only means of producing electricity. There can be, let us say, hydroelectric, there can be wind energy, and there can be so many other things that we think of. In fact, we think of other sources of energy increasingly nowadays. There is a lot of focus on that also, but combustion still remains predominantly the major source of power production, and even in engines, so even in transportation. Now the other area in which combustion is important is process industries. For example, in industries like iron, steel, processing of non-ferrous metals, then glass, ceramic, cement, lots of other industries. So, if you go to any industry, you are likely to find some furnaces, likely to find applications of combustion where material is heated, heat treatment, all kinds of things. So, again it is hard to find an industry where combustion is absolutely absent. Then combustion is used for also heating. For example, in cold countries you have essentially you burn fuel, then generate hot gases and hot exhaust gases out of the combustion process, and you can use that exhaust gases to produce space heating, and you can use hot gases to produce heating at the industrial spaces also. So, these are major applications, these are not small applications, and these are all pervasive everywhere in society. Then there is another application of combustion, not really an application of combustion, but there is unwanted combustion. So, unwanted combustion is fire. Okay. So, that is not an application of combustion. When we say application, we actually mean using combustion for the benefit of mankind, for harnessing the energy that the fuel has. But you can also have unwanted combustion. For example, you can have forest fires. So, if you watch television or if you read newspapers, if you keep track of various kinds of news items and regarding energy and stuff like that, you will also know that you will also come across many situations when there is fires consuming forests, then fires in buildings, major fires in buildings. Pretty often, unfortunately in our country, you will see fires claiming lives. That is very common. Fires in buses, fires in slums. Recently there was fire which I think destroyed about 17 DTC low floor buses. That was about maybe 10 to 15 days back. So, this keeps happening. So, that is also combustion, but we will not be discussing fire in much detail in this course, because fire is, even though that fire is also combustion, fire also has this very strong reaction zone, but that requires special treatment, and that fires is typically large scale, typically uncontrolled and typically turbulent. So, we will not be able to handle many aspects of combustion, many aspects of fire in this course. So, that has a special separate course. Now, the other point is that once we understand that combustion is actually important in so many things, power production, process industry, then I mentioned domestic and industrial heating, and also in fires. So, we understand that combustion is important for an engineer. Okay. Combustion is important for an engineer, but at the same time, what will the engineer do? If you learn combustion well, then what is it that you would benefit? Where will you be able to contribute? So, if you understand combustion well, so there is a science of combustion, right? If you just strike a matchstick and light up a candle, that is combustion, but then that is just using combustion. If you want to understand combustion, then you have to see what all physical disciplines come into combustion: fluid flow, heat transfer, mass transfer, and chemistry, that is chemical kinetics and all that. So, when you think about all that, then it will take us effort to learn the science of combustion, but then let us say we do that in this course, 42 lectures. But what will you gain out of it? Once you go out and work in an industry where combustion is, where you work as a combustion engineer, then what will you try to achieve? So, one aspect will be to procure combustion efficiency. So, you have this fuel which has certain amount of energy. How much of that you are being able to liberate in the form of heat, let us say. So, that is combustion efficiency. So, an engineer's objective is to get as high a combustion efficiency as possible. Okay. So, that there is not much unburned fuel, the energy that the fuel has is released almost 100%. So, procuring high combustion efficiency is one priority, and not just that, we will try to procure high combustion efficiency in as small a volume as possible quite often. So, there is a combustor, and a combustor will mean, if we just think of this like a black box, a combustor will mean very simply some reactants going in and some products going out. So, you have reactants going in and you have products going out. So, the reactants can mean fuel and oxidizer, fuel and air, let us say. They may be mixed together, they may not be mixed together, but you have to send these and you get some products out, right. Now, what is happening in this box is that the fuel and air are getting converted to products. So, quite often in this combustion chamber you like to complete the combustion in the smallest possible volume and as quickly as possible, right. So, you want to get high combustion efficiency in a small volume. That is often an important aspect of the work that the combustion engineer does. Then associated with this is also the fact that as an engineer you also have to be mindful about costs. So, you will try to reduce the costs as an engineer, and again like in all other disciplines of engineering, a combustion engineer will try to keep essentially two costs low. One is capital cost and the other is a running cost. So, the capital cost quite often will involve that initial investment that you make in making that combustion chamber and the piping and everything that goes with it, the controls, all that. So, if you know your combustion well, then you will be able to design a smaller combustion chamber which does not require that material. You will be able to optimize material for the combustion chamber so that you do not spend too much. So, that is the aspect of reducing the capital cost of combustion device. There is also running cost, because you have to push the fuel and air into the combustion chamber. So, you will have to have pumping, etc. So, if you design your combustion chamber poorly, you will end up spending more because maybe you have not designed it properly. So, there is a high delta P pressure drop. So, to overcome that you spend on a regular basis more on pumping the fuel and air to the combustion chamber. So, quite often this keeping the capital cost and the running cost both low is a challenging job. Okay. You try to keep the capital cost low by making a small combustion chamber, but then with if it is a small chamber with small lines going to the combustion chamber, narrow lines going to the combustion chamber, then maybe the pressure drop will also increase. So, if you think like that, then there is some kind of optimization often required between the capital cost and the running cost. But this is the second aspect of combustion engineer's job. So, what I told you is that the combustion engineer has to be mindful of how to procure the maximum combustion efficiency and also to keep the costs low. Now, very importantly, there is a third aspect also. The third aspect is that you are taking these reactants and are giving out products. So, you are sending something outside the combustion chamber. Now, these products will come out at a certain temperature and it will have a certain composition. So, what I mean by composition is that it will have some percentage of carbon monoxide, some percentage of carbon dioxide, some water vapor percentage, and maybe several other species. If the fuel has sulfur, for example, it will go out as sulfur dioxide. And whether you like it or not, it might have nitrogen oxides also coming out. Okay. It can have, depending again on the fuel, you can have some toxic material coming off. All right. So, if you are burning plastic, maybe there is some toxic fumes which will also come out. So, as an engineer, you have to be mindful about what is the temperature at which the products are going out and what is their composition. Maybe these products will be sent downstream to some other device where part of the energy of the products will be utilized. Okay. Maybe the products will be used for heating something, okay, maybe to heat air for some other process downstream. Whatever it is, you have to be mindful about the temperature and the composition. Maybe the products go out to the atmosphere. It is very critical to make sure that it does not have high percentage of pollutants, does not have toxic fumes, things like that. So, what has also happened in combustion is there was a time more than 50 years back probably, when people just thought about burning, and then they were more mindful of how much combustion efficiency they could get, how well the device was performing from an energy viewpoint. But then there are nowadays regulations on the emissions that are going out. So, people have realized that just burning and being able to run engines or produce electricity is not enough. You have to do it in such a way that the emissions are controlled. So, a lot of the combustion research, engine development, combustor development is nowadays controlled by what the emission regulations are. I think you are all aware of that, because there are Euro norms, for example, which are followed regarding car emissions, and there is our own version of the norms, right. And if you think about thermal power plant, think about any other industry which uses combustion, there are of course limits on the emissions that can go out. Okay. So, that is the third aspect. Third aspect is the temperature and composition control that the engineer should be able to do. So, this is essentially the purpose of doing this combustion course, that at the end of the combustion course you will be able to have better idea of on all these three accounts. Maybe you will not be able to take up the cost issue so much, but at least on procurement of combustion efficiency, how to burn more efficiently, and how to also make sure that the products have the right temperature, and how to control the temperature, and what kind of pollutants are going out of the products and stuff like that. Now, we were talking about this Bunsen burner flame, and I did not discuss that in much detail. I just told you that the fuel comes from maybe from the LPG cylinder, and there is air also which is entering. Now, just to give you little more idea on this, you see this base with the ring which has got a hole in it, and what you cannot see is that inside this there is a nozzle. So, there is a nozzle which runs like this, and the fuel comes out through this nozzle. So, the nozzle is hidden by the base of the Bunsen burner, and the hole is somewhere over here on the tube as well as on the ring. So, when the fuel comes out through this nozzle, it comes out because of the nozzle effect, it comes out at a higher velocity and it generates a lower pressure, Bernoulli's principle, and then that means that air will come streaming in from outside. So, you will get air coming like this from outside because there is a lower pressure, and what that will ensure is that air enters and moves with the fuel inside this tube. So, you got fuel plus air inside the tube. What is the job of the tube? The tube is allowing you to mix the fuel and air properly. So, the length of the tube is required to give you good mixing. So, it as the air moves in, it mixes with the fuel, and then finally when it comes out of this, hopefully it is properly mixed, and then you get this flame. As I told you, you got fuel plus air going in here, burning and giving you some combustion products. Now, the other reason why I am drawing this again is that few minutes back I did not tell you much about an outer flame. So, there is an outer flame also. So, there is this flame where the fuel burns with air, it gives you some combustion products. So, it might give you some products which are not products of complete combustion. So, for example, it might give you CO, it might give you some other components, it may even give you hydrogen, it may give you hydroxide radical and stuff like that, and those combustion products will actually burn in the presence of outside air. So, there is outside air also, let us not forget that outside air, because we are mixing air here, but there is outside air also available. So, that air helps to burn the fuel, the products of incomplete combustion from the first one. So, that also burns in this outer glow. So, if you notice carefully, there is an outer glow. So, that is another flame. So, essentially there are two kinds of flame. Now, let us think about for a few minutes, let us think about what is involved in combustion. So, when we are talking about combustion, what aspects are actually involved, what physics is involved in combustion? Can we think about that if we just look at this particular example? So, you have fluid flow, right. So, you have this fuel coming out through the nozzle, and then there is pressure drop and the air streaming in to fill up that space, and there is mixing in the tube. Okay, so there is fluid flow aspect, fluid flow, mixing, stuff like that. What else is there? There is chemistry, of course, because the fuel is burning, so there is oxidation, so there is chemistry. So, we can say that we have fluid mechanics, we have chemistry. In fact, the branch of chemistry that the particular aspect of chemistry that we have to focus on is chemical kinetics. Chemical kinetics deals with the rate at which reactions take place. Okay. So, there is chemistry involved, there is fluid mechanics. What else do you see here? Do you see something else? You think about the basics of various subjects that you have learned. Thermodynamics is definitely there, because you have this fuel and you have air, both come with their own energy content, they burn, they give you products. We can understand that if you do an energy balance, probably you can learn something about things like, let us say, the temperature of the products. Maybe you will be able to say something about that. Okay. So, first law of thermodynamics definitely applicable here also, and we have to learn how to use that, how to use the first law, energy conservation, for a situation like this, because mind you, here you do not have one single substance, right. So, if you think about doing an energy balance for a turbine, then you have this steam going into the turbine and then expanding, doing work, and then it is coming out, getting condensed, but it is still one substance, even though there is phase change taking place. So, you know how to do an energy balance for this situation. If you go back to your thermodynamics textbook, but think about this here, you are no longer dealing with one substance. Okay. Something enters that box that I had drawn and something else comes out, right. So, of course, thermodynamics is applicable, and we will learn how to use thermodynamics. If you look at the course introduction sheet that I gave, chemical thermodynamics is something which is mentioned in the course introduction sheet, right. So, we will be doing that also. Yeah, so we have fluid mechanics, we have chemistry, and will use thermodynamics also. What else do you see here? Heat transfer. So, where do you see this heat transfer taking place?
When we are using combustion engine for as a heat input.
Yeah. So, what you just now said is that we are using the heat that is contained in the fuel. I think that is what you meant.
Heat as a product.
Heat as a product. Okay. Now, we do not really call that as heat, isn't it? That is an energy release, right? That is an energy release. But do you see heat transfer? Conduction, convection, radiation, that sort of thing. Do you see that here? Yeah, so certain things must be happening. Again, we have not studied this, but we know that the flame is very hot, all right, and we have this fuel air coming from here. We do not expect this place to be hot as the flame is. Okay, so there must be transfer of heat. Okay, through conduction, through radiation, right. So, the flame may be heating this mixture which is coming in, that is one possibility. The other is that from the flame heat must be getting radiated to the surroundings, and the heat release that is taking place, the energy release that is taking place in the flame, that generates hot gases. So, they in fact go out, okay, due to buoyant convection. So, there is some transfer of heat between these hot gases which are going up, getting generated in the flame, moving up, transferring heat to air, surrounding air by convection, very much possible. Okay. So, we have heat transfer. What else?
Mass transfer across the flame.
Yes. So, mass transfer is another one. That is important. Actually, the various aspects of mass transfer here, but the simplest thing to understand right now is that the air, as I had drawn few minutes back, this is air, right? Why is that air moving towards the flame? This is also air. Why is that moving towards the flame?
Pressure is low inside the flame.
Pressure is close to atmospheric. It is not actually because of the pressure, but
because air is burning, so concentration of air is.
yeah. So, in this region, air is getting consumed. So, the air concentration comes down. Here, air is getting consumed, right? Is that correct? Because you have fuel and air reacting here. If it reacts, then its concentration will come down. So, there is the smaller concentration here, the larger atmospheric level concentration here. So, there is a tendency of air to move in this direction. Plus, remember, there is also a diffusion flame. Actually, I did not use the word before, but this outer flame is a diffusion flame. I will define that later. So, there is combustion taking place in this region also. So, air is getting consumed. If air gets consumed here, so then there is a sink of air in this region. So, the surrounding air will try to move in this direction. So, this is mass transfer. Okay. So, there are lots of things happening in a flame. Now, how much of this do we know? We know fluid mechanics. When you have studied fluid mechanics, you have studied thermodynamics, you have done heat transfer. In fact, you are now in the second semester, so you are now studying convective heat and mass transfer, right? Okay. So, you have mass transfer also in the same course. So, all that, and what about chemistry? Chemical kinetics. You studied that probably long time back in undergraduate. The Bunsen flame that I have drawn here does not appear to be the most complicated one. I mean, it does not appear to be as complicated, let us say, as a forest fire that you see sometimes on television, or a building fire, or a fire which develops inside an engine, or a fire inside a boiler. You may have seen images of these things. And this seems to be much more well behaved, right? It stays at one place, has a particular shape, can fluctuate a little bit if you, let us say, open a door or whatever, but very little. There may be some oscillations in this, sometimes special situations, but largely it's not doing much, sitting at one place. Right? Does not seem very complicated. The geometry is axisymmetric, you can see that. Okay. There are many more combustion situations where you got really complicated flames. This also appears to be laminar, does not it? The fluid flow, it appears to be small flows and appears to be laminar. You know, there are no wild fluctuations in this. Okay. So, even for a situation like this, even for a situation when things do not appear to be that complicated, not like a gas turbine combustor flame, even for this, just see how many things are happening. You have fluid mechanics, you have chemistry, you have thermodynamics, you have heat transfer, you have mass transfer, right? So, it is quite complicated. So, if you have not learned fluid mechanics well, then you will have difficulty here also. Okay. So, if somebody is studying just fluid mechanics, then he is fortunate that he does not have to deal with, let us say, chemical kinetics. But we are not so fortunate. So, when we are talking about combustion, all these things come in, right. So, there is a multiplicity of constituent disciplines in combustion, the many things which are interacting with one another. Okay. So, I give you this example to drive home the point that combustion is complicated science. But let me ask you another thing. Combustion is rapid oxidation of fuel releasing heat and usually also light. So, if it is an oxidation process that we are studying, why don't we leave it to chemistry students? Why is it that engineers are studying combustion? What do you think?
So chemistry is just the burning of that fuel. While we have to utilize that the energy which is being released, that has to be utilized in some engineering way. Optimization of the utilization of that energy. That's why we have to study all these things.
Okay, so his answer is that chemistry is just the burning part of it, but to utilize all this, an engineer has to come in, right? Yeah.
Mechanism must be to burn the flame completely or like that. There should be some air and fuel.
Oh, okay. I think what you mean to say is that we have to make some device, like even this simple Bunsen burner device. Somebody has to make it. An engineer has to make it. All right. But the point is that I may know all chemical reactions which are taking place for, let's say, propane burning in air, propane plus oxygen. I may know all the reactions. But then reactions are also dependent on, let's say, the rate at which you are supplying fuel and air to the reaction zone. The reaction will also depend on what kind of temperatures you have, whether there is heat loss from the flame or not. We expect reactions to get affected by temperature. I think that you are probably aware of already. Temperature is a strong parameter in reactions. You have read a little bit about Arrhenius chemistry in college, right? Arrhenius type reaction rate. So, it does depend on temperature in an exponential way. You probably remember that. So, reaction rate in the simplest sense goes with exponential of minus E by RT. Does this sound familiar? Yeah. So, there is a temperature dependence. There is a dependence of reaction rates on the rates at which fuel and oxidizer go to the reaction zone. And these are all controlled by complex processes, which will depend on fluid mechanics, heat transfer, mass transfer and everything, which is hard for a chemist to negotiate alone. Right? So, he will need an assistance of an engineer, or we can say that we might need assistance of a chemist to understand the chemical kinetics, okay, if we are playing the lead role in this. So, if somebody asks you why is it that you are studying combustion, then I think you should be able to answer now given this background. Let us also quickly look at another example of a flame, which is a non-premixed flame, which is also called a diffusion flame. The other name for non-premixed is diffusion flame. So, I'll come to that, but it just struck me that I didn't tell you what is a premixed flame. So, we'll go back to the slide again, the previous slide, previous paper. So, this flame, this conical looking flame that you see here, that is a premixed flame. That is because you are mixing fuel and air in this tube prior to combustion, pre-mixing. Pre in what sense? Prior to combustion process, before the flame, right. So, this is premixed combustion. The outer flame is actually non-premixed, because these products of incomplete combustion from the first flame were not mixed intentionally with air. They just diffused out and they could see air coming from outside, ambient, and they burnt in this diffusion flame. Okay. So, that is a non-premixed flame. So, we will go to another example of a non-premixed flame, something which is again very common. So, I am doing all this to tell you a little bit about diffusion flame, but also to tell you, give you other examples of combustion process where you can still appreciate how complicated combustion can be. So, this is a candle flame. So, in a candle flame you have this flame zone which looks like a teardrop, okay. And again flame zone means a reaction zone. The most vigorous reaction takes place very close to this periphery. What is burning there? Fuel and air. So, where does the fuel come from? Fuel comes from the material of the candle. So, the candle is made of course wax, which is a C20 to C35 hydrocarbon. That means if you take a molecule of that, it will probably have a minimum of 20 carbon atoms. Okay, so, it is kind of heavy, and this wax, of course, it is solid when you have it in the form of a candle, but then the flame transfers heat to the wax of the candle, okay, through conduction from the wick, but also by radiation, also by these hot gases which are nearby, and the wax melts, and once the wax melts it rises up the capillary, rises up the wick by capillary action, okay, rises up the wick by capillary action, and then you have this wick which is now moist with liquid wax, and once you have that wick soaked in liquid wax, that wax will in fact evaporate and it will tend to migrate towards the flame zone. So, roughly this is where the flame is. Okay. So, the fuel vapor is moving in this direction. Why does it go in that direction? Mass transfer. Okay. Again, from the previous example, what must be happening is that the fuel vapor must be getting consumed because of reaction. So, less concentration of fuel vapor there, close to 0. At the wick there is a lot of fuel which is present, that is where it is getting vaporized. So, higher concentration here, lower concentration here, so it will migrate towards the flame, right. Similar logic for the oxygen of the air to move towards the flame, right. And then they see each other, they meet, and then there is chemical reaction. So, this is fuel and this is oxidizer, they react with each other and they give you this flame. Again, very quickly, can we do this? Can we think about what physical chemical processes are involved in this for a candle flame? You already got exposure to the Bunsen flame, you already thought about it. So, now it will be little easier. So, we have seen phase change, for example. There was no phase change in the other example of the Bunsen flame. So, you have this phase change here. So, the wax is melting, right. So, that is a phase change, and there is another phase change I told you about. So, the liquid wax is getting vaporized. So, that is another phase change. So, we already got more complications than the previous example. And we have seen mass transfer because the fuel vapor goes towards the flame, oxygen and air goes towards the flame. Okay. So, you see mass transfer. Of course, there is chemical kinetics because there is reaction taking place. There is heat transfer, right. The wax is melting after all because of the heat transfer, and the flame also radiates, it gives you light. So, that means that it gives you radiation, thermal radiation in the visible range, that is why you are able to see the flame. Okay. Yeah, so this is a use of combustion for lighting applications. So, we did not mention that because this is not a very major application of combustion. I told you about power production, process industry and that kind of examples, but here is an example when people earlier days there was importance of combustion as for lighting purposes also. Even now there is some importance in lighting purposes. So, it gives you this radiation which you can see, that is how you identify the flame. So, there is radiation, there is heat transfer, right. heat transfer by radiation. There is also convection heat transfer, because the hot gases which get produced in the flame, they tend to move up and then they transfer their heat to surrounding air, things like that. All right, what else? Fluid mechanics, because we talked about capillary action. That's how the liquid wax rises up the wick. There is fluid flow generated due to buoyancy effects, because there is heat which is getting generated, heat released in the flame, hot gases moving up, that's also fluid mechanics. Right. So what else? We talked about mass transfer, we talked about chemical kinetics, fluid mechanics, heat transfer. Additionally here, compared to the previous example, we see that there is phase change. Okay. It's also important to realize in this case that the oxidizer, the most common oxidizer that we have is the oxygen in air. So that's the most common oxidizer. So what the fuel is doing, in this case we have a solid fuel. In the previous case we had this LPG, which is a gaseous fuel. So the previous case was easier because it is a gaseous fuel that is burning. So the gaseous fuel can easily find the oxidizer, which is also in the gaseous form. Okay, but here it's not the case. So the wax is trying to go to the vapor phase so that it can catch the oxidizer. Okay, so that's why it melts and then it evaporates and then goes towards the flame where it can meet oxidizer. So quite often solid and liquid fuels will have to go through this process to come to the gaseous state and then burn. There are some interesting aspects of this flame which we will talk about later. That is, for example, what's the importance of the wick, and has the wick got to be of a certain size and things like that. If time permits, I mean, these are little advanced issues, somewhat peripheral to our discussion today. So we will not be discussing those today, but during the course of the semester we might discuss those also. Plus there is something very interesting about the shape of this flame, because this is the shape of a teardrop. That's because lots of these things are happening. There is heat release in the flame and there is buoyant convection, the hot gases are going up. Okay. Flame manages to stabilize itself on the wick. The flame loses some heat to the wick, but all these processes work in such a fashion that the flame is able to stabilize itself in the wick, and primarily because of this buoyant convection which is going up, the flame gives you this teardrop shape. Okay, so it's like a drop of tear. Okay. But we realize that this has to do with gravity. Okay, the shape has to do with gravity. In fact, if you do an experiment where there is no buoyancy, there is no effect of gravity, then you will end up actually seeing a flame which is close to being spherical. So these experiments have been done on space shuttle. So they have taken a candle, they have burnt it and seen that they have got a spherical flame. Okay, so this is an example of the fact that gravity plays an important role. Sometimes we are not aware of that. Sometimes if you look at a candle, you don't think about the shape being caused because of the presence of gravity, but there is an effect of the gravity. Okay, so this tells you that again the same thing, that the combustion has many interdisciplinary aspects, various disciplines interacting with one another. It also tells you something about non-premixed combustion. So we also have to discuss one or two other aspects of combustion. I told you that combustion is this rapid oxidation reaction, and then I told you that flame is that zone where most vigorous chemical reaction is taking place. But in the same breath I have also told you that there can be a non-flame mode of combustion also. So what is a non-flame mode of combustion? One example you kind of know, That is, if we have a spark ignition engine, so there is a spark plug that I have drawn, and then there is this piston, and we have fuel air mixture here. So you all know how it works. The piston goes up, then the fuel air mixture gets compressed, and before it reaches the top dead center, you can give a spark, and you have to time the spark properly so that around the top dead center nearby it starts catching fire. So there is ignition and there is a flame, right? There is a flame. Of course, there is a flame. The flame is three-dimensional. It doesn't look anywhere similar to the conical flame which you see on the Bunsen flame. It has a complex topography, and it's also moving. Okay, it's also moving. This flame moves, right? Our candle flame did not move, our Bunsen flame did not move. So flames can move, which in fact can pose danger, right? So this is a moving flame. So this is a flame mode of combustion. There can be a non-flame mode of combustion also in this case. In some situations, as you know, I think all of you have studied internal combustion engines. When the flame keeps going, maybe there is some pocket here under certain situations. We are not discussing those situations in detail now, but we can have a situation where this part of the mixture, this is the fuel air mixture still, the flame is here. Flame hasn't reached this fuel air mixture. If the pressure and temperature is such that this fuel air mixture gets ignited there, then you will not get a flame, but it will have more like a homogeneous ignition all over this volume, and that will take place very rapidly. That will result in rapid fluctuations of pressure, which we call knocking, right? So this is a non-flame mode of combustion. This is kind of explosion taking place over a small volume. Here, what is the distinction that I am making? I am saying that there is no flame which runs through this mixture. You do not have a flame which is running through the mixture, but it auto ignites, and then you get this knocking, right? So this is non-flame mode of combustion. So we learned another thing here today. So this is non-flame mode of combustion, and we have also learned that flames can move. So one aspect that we have to be mindful of, again, is that when you have, especially when you have fuel and air mixed together, if there is an ignition, you can get a flame which can move. So you can have this tube, let us say this is a transparent tube, and you fill it up with a fuel and air mixture, transparent tube, you mixed it up with a fuel and air mixture, so you can see it from outside what is happening to it, and you give a spark here. Okay, so you are taking a spark plug, giving a spark here. So this is a spark kernel. This is a small zone where there are very high temperatures and a lot of radicals and ions present. So this will generate a flame. Okay, there is a flame. It will not look smooth probably, but I am drawing it almost like a planar flame for simplicity. And what do you expect to see? So you have ignited here, the tube has fuel air mixture. So will it stay at the same place? It will move. Okay. So even without doing a combustion course, you know that it is going to move, and it is going to move, of course, only in this direction. It cannot be moving in this other direction because there is nothing in there, right? So it will move in this direction, and it will consume the fuel air mixture. It will keep consuming, so it will move from one place to another. Again, mind you, these are not going to be planar. In fact, later in the semester, we are going to see some short videos on this, and you will know that this is not planar, but just for the sake of simplicity, I am drawing planar flames here. So this will just keep moving. So flames can move. and it's probably not very difficult to see that if you mix fuel and air, that is premixed combustion, then you are more likely to see flame movement. What's the other situation? You are not mixing the fuel and air. You are not mixing the fuel coming from one side, air coming from other side, giving you a flame. That probably is not going to move that easily. Right? Again, we have to see in detail. But here, even intuitively, all of you thought that this is going to move. It's pretty clear. So, if you think about this kind of a premixed flame, we have to try and understand certain features of it. So, one is, why does it move? That's one question. Why does it move? And it's easy to guess that it will move intuitively, but why does it move? We still have to, from a more scientific, rigorous viewpoint, why does it move? And what's the other question? What is the mechanism of movement? How does it move? So there's a why of this question, and there is this how of this question. So how does it move? Okay. Again, this question will take up in more detail later on. So will not be answering this today, but these are important questions. Now, again, couple of small things about combustion basics. This class I am utilizing to tell you about what are the basic features of combustion, some introduction to the subject of combustion. So I think our introduction will be incomplete unless I talk a little bit about solid fuel and liquid fuel combustion, because primarily the examples related to gaseous fuel, even though the candle flame example had to do with solid fuel. So let's just quickly see some examples of liquid fuel combustion. How does a liquid fuel burn? Again, if you think about the primary issue, that the oxidizer is in the gaseous phase, then you would expect that the liquid fuel will like to go to the vapor phase to be able to burn. Okay. So that's going to be an issue. And if you just take a vessel, an open pan, let's say, and you pour some liquid fuel in this and ignite, somewhere here you give an ignition source, like bring a small flame which is called a pilot flame, then this will burn, this will give you a fire. Okay. So this is one way of burning it. Now this fire actually gets the liquid fuel because it heats the liquid fuel evaporates, and then the vapor of the liquid goes to the fire zone, to the flame zone. It gets oxidizer from surroundings, that's how it burns. So that's one way of burning it, but this is more like a fire situation, study of a fire situation. In a more controlled way, if you want to burn liquid fuel, then you can think about the diesel engine experiment. So you have, let's say, an injector. I think probably everybody knows that a diesel engine will have an injector, right? So the diesel is sprayed and it goes into a zone where you have compressed air, air which has already been compressed, right, at high pressure, and in this you are spraying the fuel. So this is a nice thing, because you are sending a stream of liquid, and then what the injector is doing is, because of the design of the injector that we have, this high pressure liquid fuel, it breaks into a lot of small droplets. So this gives you a spray. What does a spray consist of? It consists of all these liquid droplets of different sizes moving at different velocities. Okay. So you are doing all this, and there is hot air at high pressures, and in this sort of a situation ignition takes place, and then you got non-premixed sort of combustion in diesel engine. So quite often we try to burn liquid fuel with the help of this process where we are producing a spray. So this is called atomization. So this is a very common way of burning liquid fuel. All right, so we are almost running out of time. I'll just tell you one last example about solid fuel combustion. We saw candle combustion, wax burning, but let's say a more practical example. So a practical example is that of a boiler. Okay. So there is a boiler, let's say, which is burning pulverized coal. Okay. So you are sending coal particles with air. What is pulverized fuel? This is coal which has been ground to very small sizes. So the particles are of micron size. Okay. 70 micron, 80 micron, 100 micron, 150 micron. The larger particles may be more like 200 micron or more. Okay. You need to have a proper distribution for effective combustion of coal. So these coal particles are sent with air to a boiler. Okay. So this is pulverized coal combustion, and these particles will move through this zone. There is a fireball, there is combustion taking place here, and as the particles move, they also release their they also lose their combustible material. They burn, and then ultimately, hopefully, in the height that you are giving for the combustion zone, they will all burn properly, and the heat that is generated because of this combustion will be able to heat the water and convert that to steam. That is the idea. Now, if you think of a coal particle, so this coal particle travels through this, it gets heated because of the presence of the fire, and if it gets heated, so there is heat coming in, then it will lose its moisture. If it has some moisture, it will lose that moisture, and then subsequently it will also thermally break down. So coal is a long chain molecule, and that long chain will break and it will give you smaller species. You can get hydrocarbons, you can get methane, it will get carbon monoxide and lots of other stuff, which we in general called volatile matter. And this is combustible, so that will come out, and that volatile matter is in the gaseous form. That will burn in the flame zone. That will help sustain this fire zone, and then after that, what is left of the coal is actually original coal particle minus the moisture. First it lost moisture, and then it lost some of its volatile matter, most of its volatile matter. So it lost moisture, it lost volatile matter. So once these are gone, you get coal which has got carbon and it has got some mineral matter, and this will also burn, and it will finally leave you with ash and the products of char combustion. Okay. So again, it loses moisture, it gives you volatile matter which can burn. So this volatile matter is in the gaseous phase, it can burn with the oxygen of air. So again, it has come to the gaseous phase. That is the point I was making. But there is something interesting about this. After it loses volatile matter, it is still left with carbon, and that carbon is in the solid phase, carbon solid, and that actually burns in the presence of air. So this does not go to vapor phase, it does not need to. So the air goes into these particles, and air eats up the solid carbon here. Okay. So this is a broad overview of combustion. We will close today. So we'll meet in the next class. Thank you.